Welcome to the War in Heaven. I am Austin Hepworth. I'm here with Michael Hepworth, and we are talking today about humility. It may be a, quote, humble subject, but it is one that we think is deserving of talking about, as there's actually a fair amount of power that comes to us and to our society as we're able to be more humble. The interesting thing about humility, perhaps, is that in my experience, anyways, I don't feel that most people have a firm understanding or grasp of what humility really is. And interestingly, we use the term humility and the term humble, and those two terms may have slightly different meanings to them. So, for example, you could say, he was born in humble circumstances. Those humble circumstances have a meaning of poor, um, less riches or affluence associated with them. But humility is not necessarily a state of being poor or poorer. It is more a state of understanding and a state of not letting your understanding influence how you view your identity, your self-esteem, and different things like that. So if you go back to our discussion on pride, pride is where you start to compare with others to determine where you fit in. Pride is this process of comparing to say, oh, I'm really good at math, that makes me special. We're starting to elevate ourselves or our worth or a sense of identity through the things that we see and compare with others. Humility is the state opposite pride. The dictionary gives us that much. It says it's the opposite of pride. And to me, that means we're not comparing to find our place, our identity, who we are. We already understand that. And humility, I believe very strongly, is the ability to see. I like to say it, the simple way I like to see it is the ability to see as God sees. That unpacks a little bit into saying something like the ability to see and understand truth without it elevating or pulling us down internally. It just, we are who we are. And we may be good at something, we may be bad at something, but those facts don't raise us up internally or pull us down internally. Because when we're humble, when we're talking about having the state of humility, so that type of humble, not the poor humble, when we have humility in us, we have a sense of self-worth that comes from something besides our comparisons with other people. That enables us to see truth better and understand. We can understand if we're wrong about something and admit it. It doesn't hurt us at that point to admit that we're wrong about something, because our self-worth or image isn't tied to our ability to be correct all the time. And so but again, when we talk in society about humility, I've heard people often say that they'll make a joke and say, yeah, a man got up and said he was the most humble man in the room. And then they laugh and say, yeah, that's impossible. A humble person can't say something like that. And I've thought about that for a long time, and I thought, is that true? Could a humble person not say that they're the most humble person in the room? Now, certainly, there's a sense of comparison when you say most. But pride, I think, has two parts to it still, the comparison and finding self-worth or elevating yourself above others. So kind of curious, Michael, to know your thoughts on the question of, can you say you're the most humble person in the room, or can a person say that? And on some of the ways that society sees humility.
Yeah, I might slightly rephrase the question to something like humility is my best quality, only because I might look around a room and have no idea what levels of humility other people have. So I'd have a hard time saying I'm the most. If I went through like some sort of measurement process, then maybe that question makes more sense. But I might say humility is my best quality. Somebody might say, "What's your best quality?" And you say humility. They might laugh because it sounds the way we've understood humility and pride. It might sound prideful to declare your best quality as humility, which would seem as a sort of paradox. But to your point of the comparison and the elevation of your self-worth, um, I think a humble person has the ability to look at themselves and understand what their great qualities are and understand what their bad qualities are, and be able to talk about either one without feeling like they are increasing or diminishing their own value. Their value isn't based in what their best quality is or their worst quality is. Their value is based in who they are. And so it would seem to me that you could legitimately say my best quality is humility, um, without that being a prideful thing. It kind of depends on what's in your heart at that point. If you think that your humility makes you better than those around you, that's where that paradox seems to grow. Um, I think society, to the other question, looks a lot to comparison to find value in things. Um, this isn't to say that we shouldn't that we should just throw out all comparisons. We use comparisons, metrics, measures to gauge progress, to understand impact. So comparisons can be very useful tools. It's where you take that comparison and then decide that this person's more valuable than that person based on their skill set, things they do. Many times we look to well-educated persons and we will value their opinions on morality more so than somebody who isn't as educated. But I don't know that, the virtue of an individual is really based on what their education is. But we put a lot of value emphasis on education, and then we don't allow people who are less educated to really have a voice in a moral conversation. So too often when society looks at humility, they just think, is this person, um, maybe a few different ways, does this person help people and not tell anybody about it? That might be one way they look at humility. Or is it just that this person is willing to help people? I was trying to look up ideas for humility in um, modern news stories today, and I couldn't really find a lot. There was examples of famous people or politicians going and serving in a manner of like giving meals to homeless people or something like that. But it all felt so staged as a politician, where they say, "Hey, I'm going to go help these people out. Come bring all the cameras. Make sure you publish these stories. Tell everybody how humble I am." So it's got to be more than just the act of serving. It's got to be what your intentions are. Are you trying to make it so people can see you, or are you just trying to do good and you really don't care who sees it? Um, so society seems to struggle with an understanding what humility is. We're not allowed to discuss our good qualities in order to be humble, kind of the way we think about it, because we seem to think that any discussion about what we do well can't be associated with humility. But I think that's wrong. I think we can discuss what we can do well, and we can simultaneously discuss what we do really poorly, and neither one affects the value we have in ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to watch. There is a societal trend right now um, to share your vulnerabilities or to be vulnerable. And so maybe the better way to say is to be vulnerable, which means being willing to get up and admit your mistakes or, say you did something wrong. And it's really interesting to me to watch as people start to do this. Because again, there's good to being able to discuss where we go wrong or what's off inside of us or how we messed up, because we all do that. But quite often we're starting to do it for praise and attention and share these things. And we start to seek to be elevated, to say, oh, I'm such a good person because I can share my vulnerabilities. And again, this gets into this paradox of humility of, well, can you accurately say who you are and what you are? And can you even do it, even if it gets shared widely, can you still be humble and have that trait of humility? I think the answer is yes. So much of it depends on what's in your heart. And from the external factor, to your point, Mike, we as a people can't determine truly what's in someone's heart. We can make guesses based on circumstantial evidence. but it's hard to know for sure. And so this is where it is, I think, a more clean statement to say humility is my best quality and talk about that than it is to say I'm the most humble person in this room. Because how do you get to that point of knowing whether you're better or not at it than other people in the room? That takes a lot of facts, a lot of observations of life experiences over many years to try and really know the condition of someone's heart. And so we end up where, as a society, we're starting to celebrate talking about failures, talking about things that we're vulnerable about. But it is interesting to the extent of being able to say, well, I'm really good at math, or I'm really good at this. And I don't know if we have an equal parity in society of being able to talk about both. And one of the reasons why, to me, when we talk about the war in heaven, when we talk about this battle between evil and good, one of the most critical things to understand about who we are is that God gave us each a gift, a talent, a calling. There's something we're supposed to do. And He gave us the means to do it, the ability. If we cannot talk about our strengths and the things we can do well, then how do we ever rise to be who we're supposed to be? And this is a thought that's gone through my mind many times. When I was in high school, college, law school, I graduated first in my class from each graduating class. And I found it was interesting. I rarely wanted to tell anyone about my grades or class ranking. I don't feel it gave me a lot of measure of identity. I didn't find my identity or worth in my grades necessarily. But I did find that people would get very frustrated and upset, and they didn't like me if they found out what my grades were. And so I felt some of the aspects of pride where people try to put others down and do things so they can feel better about themselves. But in that, I often thought through that process of just, again, the question of, well, can I talk about this or not? Or is it prideful? For years and years and years, I maintained this notion that I shouldn't talk about it because I didn't want to be prideful. And that was the assumption I operated under, that to be humble or to have humility meant not talking about things. If someone said in church, hey, who can play the piano? Well, I'm not going to raise my hand because why would I do that? And I think that as over the years, I've learned that this is a form of false humility where I say I'm not going to say things because I'm going to stay humble. I'm not going to be prideful about it and just put it out there to the world. And again, there's a time and a place. You can't just walk up to everyone and say, hey, guess what I graduated as? Or, hey, guess what I played the piano really well? But should I shy away from being willing to tackle a complex problem if someone says, hey, I need someone that understands this really well? Is it bad to say, well, I can help? Is it bad for a really good piano player to raise their hand at church and say, I can step in? I believe very strongly that when God gives us gifts and talents and things to do, He tells us openly in the scriptures, He says, don't hide this under a bushel. Let your light so shine. And as I reflected on that, don't go hide things that He's given us. Let your light so shine. I often thought, but how do you do that and not be prideful? And going through that process is what's at least led me to where I'm at today, of taking the position that humility is seeing myself as God sees me. It's seeing truth. And it's not elevating or pulling myself down or others up or down based on those facts. It's okay to be truthful and say, yep, I don't have a great singing voice yet. Still working on it. And so I may not be the best for singing, but hey, if you need some legal work done, I can do a good job. And I don't have to take pride in that. I don't have to put myself above someone else or put someone else down. Another example that I found was In school, I could do math, and so many people would say to me, "You're so smart, Austin." And I'd say, "Why? Why do you say that?" They say, "Because you can do math." I'd say, "But you can draw incredibly, and I cannot look at something and understand how to then take that and put it down on a piece of paper. My mind doesn't have, well, it has a very limited capacity to take something three-dimensional and put onto a two-dimensional surface. And my drawing is still probably first or second grade quality. And I look at that and I can tell that there's a measure of intelligence associated with art. That's something I just don't currently have. And when I look at an artist, I actually feel they're smart because they can discern things, they can translate things, they can do things. But not everyone views themselves that way. They place value on certain things, and it's usually what society places value on, and then they devalue the other gifts they have. My strong feeling is that of the gifts God's given us, they're all necessary. They're all important. One can't exist without the other. We need all of the gifts and all of the things in order to achieve the state that God would have for us, that's good, that would be ideal, to produce these things. And so I think that it's essential that we start to understand we need to embrace the gifts God's given us, but we don't have to become prideful. We don't have to let our identity be built on those, because these can come and go. God can take them, He can give them. But we can use them to accomplish good, to do things, if we're willing to look at them truthfully and honestly, again, without that emotional attachment to it. Michael, do you have thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I like when you're talking about gifts from God and how we all have talents, these gifts that we've been given. It's something in society we see readily when it comes to physical gifts. For the most part, we acknowledge that some people are blessed with great physical capacities and other people aren't. Some people are born with innate athletic abilities and other people aren't. And if you take somebody who is born with these abilities and they're born with size and strength, and somebody who isn't, and they both work equally hard at a given sport, person who started with the strength and the speed and the endurance and everything is just going to be ahead, even if they both work the same hard at something. And for the most part, we accept that. And in some spheres, we value the athletes higher. But overall in society, we seem to accept, well, if you're an athlete or not an athlete, it's okay. But we have a harder time when it comes to intellectual capacity. We look at certain intellectual capacities. You mentioned mathematics as being very important, and other ones as being not so important. And it's pretty clear that everybody's born with different intellectual capacities. And this isn't to say too often we value people via those intellectual capacities, but we shouldn't be doing that. We should recognize that everybody has different aptitudes in different ways. And you may have a measurable aptitude, an IQ, for example, that's really high. That doesn't make you a more valuable person than somebody whose IQ is lower than yours. Lots of these things are just genetic traits that you're born with. But too often we value individuals who have higher intellectual aptitude than others. And that comes from that comparison and deciding that if you can do really well in school and in mathematics, then you're worth so much more than another person who doesn't do as well. And there's that pride entering into our conversation. And humility lies in being able to say this person has these capacities and they're really good at them, and this person has different ones. And maybe we need to do a better job of helping people that aren't in the lanes that we value highly today to understand what their gifts are and the ways that they can contribute. Everybody has a way to contribute. And you don't lose value because you don't contribute in a way that other people do. So when I think the other thing I want to mention along those same lines is you talk about sometimes we let our great abilities define who we are. I I play the piano. I played for quite a few years. I play it reasonably well. I'm not classically trained, but I play it reasonably well. And I've thought a lot about how that could be taken away from me through many ways. Um, Physically, you can have diseases, arthritis, or something that maybe prevent you from moving your fingers. You can lose your sight, which can make it harder. You can still play, but it can make it more difficult. You can lose your hearing. And I always wonder if I placed my value and who I was just on playing the piano, and if something like that happened to me out of my control, I lost my hearing, couldn't move my fingers anymore, what would I then not value myself anymore? And I think that's where the pride and the humility come in. I think is in humility you can recognize the thing you do well, but that doesn't then set your value. So if something like that would happen to me, the question would be, did I set my value so highly on that that now I don't believe I'm a valuable person? I have no way to contribute anymore. Or did you understand that that was something you did well, and when it was taken away, you say, I'm still a person. I still have value. I just need to go find the next thing that I can help out with. And too often we get married to the idea of I am this thing that I do really well. When that's taken away, we get lost. And I think part of humility is being able to say, I am separate from these things I do well. I am somebody who does things well, and I can do more things well, and I can continue to learn and grow.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Some good examples. One of the thoughts that came to me as you were talking was a connection between humility and faith to try. When we're prideful and we have an identity built around something, we become afraid of trying. So to give a somewhat silly example, we become afraid of trying to push that boundary because if we fell, it might hurt our identity. So to give a silly example, I've been in 2 push-up contests in my entire life. I won both of them. And I found that there was a lot of pride I got from saying I've won 100% of all push-up competitions I've been in. And now, was I anywhere near as strong as really strong people? No. I was just competing against people that weren't quite as strong as I was. But I found that in order to keep that record, I then refused to enter other or join other push-up competitions. And it was really interesting to me to watch over the years as I would decline push-up competitions because I didn't want to lose. And the fear of losing came from the fact that there was some element of pride in saying, yeah, I've won all the push-up competitions I was in. Again, a silly thing, not even one that hardly ever comes up in conversation. I rarely share it with people. But because there was some aspect of pride there, I didn't try on other competitions. Now, to me, what happens to us when we have humility is suddenly we can try all we want. It doesn't matter. I can do a push-up competition today and lose. Nothing off my back. I can congratulate the person that won, and life goes on. We're just happy. We tried. We did something fun. And yet, when we're prideful and we're attaching something to it, we become fearful. Pride and fear always go hand in hand. We start to fear what people think. We start to fear how we'll be received or accepted. But when we're humble, when we just see it for what it is, yep, I can do some push-ups, but I can't do as many as someone else in the world. Then I can just happily be involved. I can participate. I can connect with people because I'm not concerned about what it's going to do to my feelings about myself if I lose that push-up competition. And again, it's fascinating to look at this situation in my life and think this was just the littlest string of pride inside me. Again, I probably told it to maybe 4 people, 5 people my whole life that I recall, and kind of in a joking way. But that little string of pride still produced fear to try in other situations. And I didn't try. And I think, man, for the things I really care about, it's got to produce so much fear inside me. And then again, when I start to look at, how do I get past this fear? How do I try and do something? How do I move forward? It's to say, well, I need to stop basing my identity on it. And so when we reach this state of humility, we actually achieve freedom from a lot of the fears that hold us down. There'll still be some fear. I could still be afraid to jump off a cliff, or I could still be afraid of heights. Those are just some natural things that your body's saying, whoa, danger, danger. But many of the fears that hold us back, that hold us from trying something, are going to go away as it relates to human interaction, because we know that regardless of the outcome, we're still of value, we're still of worth. The outcome doesn't change it. But we can gain great satisfaction and fulfillment in life through trying, through progressing. And this is the power of humility. We become powerful, we become effective because we become willing to try. And that changes so much in our society when we lose that fear of what others think about us. And so a humble person, I would submit, isn't fearful about what somebody else thinks about them. Humility cuts out this guessing game of, oh, what's the person going to think? And then we start to act by what we think they think of us. And it's a silly game we play consistently in society because we're trying to protect this identity or the self-worth that we formed. And we're trying to make sure we protect that. Don't do anything that harms that, so we're not going to progress. We're not even going to use our gifts to their fullest extent, probably. Why would we do it if someone makes fun of us? Why would we do it unless it's going to be a bestseller? I still remember a very prominent person here in Utah. I guess I don't know if I should say very prominent. A prominent person has a fair following. Often says, people ask him to run for office fairly often. He says, I won't run unless I can be guaranteed to win. And I think about that often. I think, how many times do we refuse to do something unless we can be guaranteed the result? And then if we're guaranteed the result, is there any fulfillment? And I'd say, I don't think there's much. And we stay hollow and empty feeling inside. If we want satisfaction, we do hard things. We try, we fail, we get back up, we try again, we fail. But when we're humble, something inside of us says, I know I can do this. Yeah, I didn't get it the first time. Yeah, I didn't get it the second time. Yeah, I didn't get it the third time. But I can do this. I'm going to figure it out. And we try till we do it. That's how good exists. That's what gives good life, is through people choosing to share the things they have with others. God gave us our gifts specifically to share with and help others. He didn't give us perfection in those gifts. And if we have pride associated with them, we demand more and more perfection of ourselves. We won't do it unless we're guaranteed likes, clicks, views, different things. And so we have this fascinating realm where we won't try. So to me, humility is closely tied to faith, which is closely tied to not having fear, which is closely tied to accepting what God's given us and working to do something with it. And when we work to see ourselves as God sees us, we will naturally do more, be more involved, and start to shape things more and more. Because that is the essence of being human. That's the essence of being a child of God. Now, Satan in the war in heaven, he has to try and destroy that. He has to try and say, don't try it, Austin. So he whispers these things to us. And it's fascinating even to go to the Bible and look at when Jesus was tempted, when Satan came to him. So Jesus, when he's here on this earth, gets these temptations, and I often looked at them and never fully understood. I go, well, why would this be a temptation to cast yourself off a temple, for example, and see if angels catch you? But the piece that Satan was playing on is that if you read the scripture, Satan would say to him first, if thou be the Son of God, then turn this stone to bread. Or if thou be the Son of God, then cast thyself off the temple. And what he was doing is he was trying to instill doubt about who he was. If Satan could win on that, then he could keep the Savior from doing the things he needed to do for us. If Satan can convince us, if thou be the Son of God or a daughter of God, then, just make sure people accept you. He's diverting our attention from truth. He's putting it into these comparisons to say, who are you? He's challenging that notion. And we have to stand up and say, I'm a child of God. Whether I can speak well or sing well or draw well or do math well, that doesn't change that fact at all. And I'll still try. I'll still do what I'm called to do and what I'm supposed to do. Because at the end of the day, this is who I am. And to me, humility is a very strong response to Satan's push to say, if thou be. And I think he pushes that on all of us all the time. If thou be someone special, make sure your friends like you. It's a comparison thing. He's shifting us to that pride to find our identity somewhere else. And we have to fight back against that. And as we do, we gain freedom. We gain faith. We lose fear. And we start to act in ways that can help shape and change the world around us for good. Michael, do you have any final thoughts or comments for us in our discussion on humility today?
I like you're relating it to faith and fear. And I think that humility, pride, faith, fear, they all go together. They're sometimes just many sides of the same coin, and us trying to figure out who we are. And if we give in to the pride and the fear side, then we try to make who we are be these things we may do well. And it inhibits us from acting, it takes away our freedom. And if we turn towards the humility side and we say we're children of God, and that's what defines us, it opens us up to be able to do so many more things. A good example of this, when I was a teenager, I had a number of individuals at church trying to convince me that I should play the piano for different groups. They knew I played the piano, but I had in my mind that I didn't want to get up and make a mistake. That seemed devastating to me. My pride said people will look at you differently if you get up, play the piano, and make a mistake. They'll think you're terrible. So I had a lot of my image based on doing it well. But over starting at that point and throughout my life, as I've been able to let go of that and say, you know what, you made a mistake, do better next time, and then just move on. It's used to be when I get to play in front of people, I just shake and my feet would shake, which make it hard to hold the pedal down. And I don't shake hardly at all anymore when I play in front of people. And it's a removal of fear because I stopped placing my value on doing it perfectly every time. I place my value on, am I doing better than I used to? Am I trying? Am I practicing? Am I trying to improve myself? Not how well did I play it better than that individual who played before me? I saw this other person playing that never made mistakes. Am I as good as that person? Didn't matter. And it's to your point, it takes away the fear and it allows you to act far more freely and to learn so much more. Now that I'm playing in front of people for so many years, I've had so many more opportunities to play. It means more opportunities to learn and grow rather than just keeping it to myself in my house and not learning nearly as much as I did. And so humility, fear, faith, they're all connected. And we expand our faith and we diminish fear as we seek for humility.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. I think it's very good to hear some of these experiences and to see ways that that humility's manifest. And if you look up online, there are sites that will say, here's 25 ways that humility's manifest, for example. And so some of those will say things like, you apologize if you're wrong. You're not afraid to take risks. You understand that you can't control everything. You accept criticism. You understand your faults and shortcomings. You respect the views of others. You accept defeat and work hard to become better. they'll go through and list these things, and I look at it and say, yeah, these are all things that happen as we remove this notion of being concerned about what others think or finding our identity or value there. And so if you find that these things are hard for you, it's not to beat yourself up and say that you're a prideful person. It's to say, just to understand, you may be placing your identity on things you can't control, on things that aren't actually what brings you identity or worth, and that you need to shift that and change that. And it's very, very transformative in life to start to look at how you define yourself, what brings you value, and start to intentionally shift away from those things to find value in being a child of God, find value in being equal with everyone else. And just accepting the fact that you have value because you're a human, because you exist. There is value there. And when you put faith in that principle, the need to find identity elsewhere leaves. And then that process, as we continue through it, continue refining, getting rid of the things, that make us not enter the push-up competitions, or not play in front of people, or not share thoughts that we probably should share. We find ourselves then changing, becoming, realizing those things don't matter, and moving on. And it's very freeing and liberating. So humility is a state of great strength, I believe. And it's like you said, Michael, goes hand in hand with faith. And these two build and strengthen each other. And so we appreciate you being with us today as we talk about some of these principles associated with the war in heaven, associated with some of the principles of good, principles of evil or sins that come up. Again, pride is universal sin. That's one of its names. We all have it, and it's okay to admit that and talk about it, but it's helpful to understand what we need to then do to overcome that. It's not in putting ourselves down and saying, oh, I'm no good at that. That's not defeating pride. Defeating pride is accepting who you are, what you are, being responsible for it, and then living to maximize that. Thanks for joining us, and we plan on talking with you more next week.